Good evening, Lake Washington School District families, staff, and students. Thank you for taking time tonight to join me for this event as we share with you information about our pathway forward. I appreciate you taking time to join us for this event. Also know that this event is being recorded for viewing after this event should it be needed. I recognize that there are so many parts and pieces to our lives as individuals, as a community, and really as a country, but that tonight is about our work as a community to take steps forward as we continue to focus on health and safety of our community. I would like to recognize our board of directors, which are in attendance tonight. I want to thank them for their leadership and governance of our school district. Tonight, you're going to hear me and one of my colleagues, Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden, talk about the timelines and transitions to the new learning models, both in-person learning models and remote learning models. We're going to share information about what those elementary learning models look like, but we're also going to talk about our pathway and work around secondary and the considerations being made and some timelines for that work as well. Also want to reference some of our work of this school year, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities. I also want to talk about our commitment to both process, communication, get into a little bit about the current state of COVID-19 in our county, but also our local communities, and also want to review some of the lessons learned from our in-person learning that we have conducted so far this school year. I do want to start by thanking our families, staff, and students. Families, we just want to offer you the greatest thank you for the work that you have done this year to partner with us in the learning of your children. This is a year like none other, and without you, without your support, commitment, dedication, this year could not have been a success. And we recognize the challenges that have been associated with remote learning for many, many students, and we thank you for your dedication and commitment through this time. To our staff who had to learn what school means all over again. What does remote learning mean? Live instruction, how do you engage students in a meaningful way in this environment? Our staff learned what it meant to teach and engage and work with and outreach and ensure students had access to food resources. All of the work that went into making this school year happen was a tremendous lift for every staff member across the district, and I want to thank you for your work. And then our students. Our students have been champions of learning this year, working as hard as they can in these difficult environments, learning how to read, learning how to write, learning content in middle school and high school in ways that they never have before. These are challenging times, and I can't thank our students enough for everything that they have done this year. I want to recognize some of the challenges that we've gone through. When I think about remote learning as a challenge, remote work, essential workers, and everything that our community has done to step up during this global pandemic. It has truly been a challenge, and I just want to offer a recognition of that. I also want to recognize that there have been many people affected during this time by COVID-19, the loss of jobs, work status. There are people that are in food insecurity now when they never have before. These are challenging times that only as a community we can get through. And our K-12 learning for our students is one of those challenges that we continue to address, and I'm excited about our pathway forward. I want to recognize the mental health challenges that have been associated with just this time, the stay-at-home orders, the loss of connection, limited personal interactions. Those challenges are real. It's both youth and adults going through these times. I also want to recognize issues related to race and justice and our collective responsibility as a community to ensure that our school district is a safe and inclusive environment for every student, staff member, and family, because these truly are the community's schools. And so when we think about that work of ensuring that we have safe and inclusive schools, those are challenges that we need to continue to work through, because whether it's in a remote environment or in person, every student deserves to feel safe, included, and welcomed into our schools and classrooms. We also had opportunities for growth and learning and change as a school district, as a staff, as a community. I want to recognize that we implemented childcare right as the governor really put all of us into a shutdown. And so we had childcare workers, we had administrators on site, we had staff on site, continuing the operations of our school district, even in the spring. So through that opportunity, we learned a tremendous amount. Our staff truly shifted to what does it mean to provide a more robust learning environment in a remote experience for students. That came with significant amount of work and effort and professional learning and development for our staff. Tremendous amount of work. Our technology team really had to do a deep dive into our systems and architecture of our system to make sure that students and staff had access to learning and teaching and work remotely here on site. We also were able to provision a one-to-one laptop program for all students. We're enhancing that one-to-one laptop provision through the purchase of thousands of devices that will be getting into the hands of elementary students, because we know their experience is critically important, and the device that we provisioned them wasn't the device that was ideal. We're getting them that ideal device. That came with a lot of ingenuity, creativity, and effort by teams all across the district. And the adoption of Teams, a platform where our learning, teaching, professional collaboration, and engagement can take place. We as a district and really as a community adopted that platform to be able to have a consistent method to engage with one another. I also need to recognize just the complexity and the differences that all of us are experiencing these situations with. COVID-19, vaccines, to be in the community, to not, these are all very topics that become very divisive if we let them. People have personal opinions, people have personal experiences that we need to recognize. And quote unquote, doing the right thing, it isn't always crystal clear, because there are so many different layers and complexities to this issue. We could allow this to fracture us as a community, but I truly hope that we're able to come together as a community, move forward through these challenging times, knowing that decisions that are being made rarely are going to be exactly what any one individual thinks is absolutely correct. Returning to in-person learning might be too soon for some, but it might not be soon enough for others. But please know that I have taken significant time to consider all community stakeholder input, public health recommendations, and our agency requirements as I have made these decisions around our pathway forward. It's important to remember that we really do receive guidance and requirements from a number of agencies, departments throughout the state of Washington. The governor definitely plays a role in the orders that he has made, the proclamations that he has made. We partner with the Washington Department of Health and our King County Public Health Department to truly understand how to move forward in these situations. We are responsible to Labor and Industry, L&I, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. You may know that as OSHA. And then the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI, they also provide guidance and recommendations for us as a school district. These are all agencies that we have to partner with. We have to understand the guidance they're giving us, and we have to understand the expectations and responsibilities as an employer and as a K-12 organization so that we can truly move forward. How are we going to be successful through this effort? I kind of think of it as a complete and total collective commitment to health and safety, implementing our Lake Washington School District COVID-19 safety plan with absolute fidelity, that we support the process and one another through this process, because these are challenging times. Change is difficult, and all of us are going to be going through changes and processes that are difficult for us. And then truly offering respect to one another, knowing that everyone is in a different place, that people are making potentially different decisions. Neighbors may make different decisions about whether their child receives an in-person learning experience or a remote learning experience. And neither is right and neither is wrong. And that's important for us. And our staff, respecting their processes that they're going through as they work to make this happen. Over the last period of time, I hope you have seen me demonstrate a commitment to process as a school district, that we have engaged in ongoing work and dialogue with our state and local health experts, because they are truly the ones that can provide us that expert advice as to how to implement K-12 education during this global pandemic. They're the ones that are providing guidance for next steps, but ultimately we truly are the decision makers as school administration. I hope our stakeholder communication has been timely. I hope you've seen it as providing you with relevant information. But we also have been committed to the implementation of guidance and requirements through this entire process. Our COVID-19 safety plan is truly a model for school districts across the state for how do you develop a plan that is nimble and can be adjusted as needed, but truly provides that layer of health and safety that can mitigate the risk of COVID-19 in our schools, and we've demonstrated that, and I'm excited to talk about that as well this evening. Another commitment that we've made is our ongoing work in with our unions, our teachers unions, our other classified unions, to really engage with them around these around this work, ensuring that we, when we need to, negotiate the working conditions for these activities and these changes, and making sure we partner with them through these things, because these are complex times for the employees in Lake Washington School District, which are our teachers and our secretaries and all of the staff that work to implement school, whether it being remote or in person. You'll remember this summer and fall, we decided in late July to move to a fully remote learning model for the majority of students. You may be aware that we had about 500 to 600 students that were receiving in-person learning services since early September. Those were students that are qualified for IEPs, receiving special education services. It's not all students that receive special education services, but some students. And I'm proud to describe and tell you that we have done that. We have done that well, that our staff has implemented the COVID-19 safety plan well, and that we actually have not had a single incident where there was a spread of the virus on our campuses. We had the virus show up on our campuses almost on a weekly basis, but we were able to implement those plans. We implemented all of the mitigating measures that are required, and that truly allowed us to implement school in a safe and healthy manner for our staff. You'll also know that there was a rapid decline in case rates here in King County and really across the state. In early September, we started to do some planning around returning to in-person, and then when cases started spiking again, really the guidance, advice, and our decision that we made was to pause on that return to an in-person learning model at that time. We continued our work around negotiations for our kindergarten and first grade return to in-person learning, and all of the work that goes in and is associated with that. We're excited that we are scheduled and anticipate wrapping up those negotiations early next week so that we can move some additional items forward. And we know that that work that we have done with Lake Washington Education Association around negotiating those working conditions truly will be a framework for us as we move to negotiate the working conditions for our upper elementary grades and our secondary levels. I'm going to go ahead and transition to PowerPoint presentation and a few slides. And we're going to, I see that my video is frozen, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off just for a minute, see if we can get that rectified. And so even if my video isn't working, I'm just going to go ahead and transition to the presentation, and hopefully we can get my video working here in a few minutes. And so I want to start by talking about the health and safety data, data that you have heard me received from me in writing, and we've talked about and referenced during this time. These are the data that we continue to reference and pay attention to as we are working towards our implementation and changes to our learning models. We really do look at that overall King County case rate. That is by the guidance of King County Public Health. That is the data that they use to evaluate the readiness of districts across the county. And so we look at that as a rate per 100,000 residents over the last 14 days. We look at the transmission or the reproductive rate, meaning how quickly is the virus spreading. We look at hospitalization readiness, testing capacity, but we also do look at the local municipality case rates. And there's 4 distinct areas that are referenced on the King County Public Health dashboard that I will talk about tonight. And so first, I just want to talk about King County, and these are the data that were updated just this afternoon, and so do want to reference that. And so in King County, the current case rate is right at 277 cases per 100,000 over the last 14 days. As you may know, this case rate was north of 400 just a few weeks ago, and so we've seen definitely a decline over the last period of time in that case rate number. We've also seen the transmission rate. It's been pretty steady over the period of time, maybe a few weeks to a month, right at that 1.2 transmission rate. What King County Public Health indicates is that a transmission rate of below 1 is their target, and so we are very close to that target. With hospital readiness, we know this time of year our hospitals are more impacted naturally, but it's also important to know that 9.7% of beds currently are being used for COVID-related illness. And testing has been the data around testing has been a little bit interesting from King County. I believe that's because of the holidays and whatnot. And so as of just a few days ago, it was a very positive. As of today, it seemed to have spiked, and it appeared that testing wasn't as available as it has been. We'll continue to look at that, and if there needs to be questions about why, we will definitely ask those questions. Here in our own local community, we have lower case rates here in Kirkland, Redmond, Union Hill, and Sammamish than from across King County. And so it's important for us to pay attention to that as well. As you know, our case rates were significantly lower than the overall King County rate for a long time. They're continuing to be lower, and you can see here that Kirkland right at 208, Redmond 196, Union Hill 159, and Sammamish, which actually is part Lake Washington and part Issaquah, is right at 127 cases per 100,000 over the last 14 days. You can also see hospitalization per 100,000 is relatively similar between all 3 of our communities. Excuse me, 4 communities. One of the things that Governor Inslee announced right before we went to winter break was an update to what you have heard me refer to as the decision tree. They are now calling it the school metrics and toolkit. So you'll hear me refer to it as the toolkit. And it's important to note that the toolkit isn't just about a single number and a single metric. The toolkit really is about the collection of information and data, research that our state Department of Health, the research that they have done here in Washington State, across the country, and really looking across the globe at implementations of K-12 in-person learning. And that's how they landed on changes to the decision tree, which is now the toolkit. I do want to read just a couple of snippets for you because I think it also helps put context for this work. And so in their introduction, they talk about that this is a framework that can assist local health officers in guiding and school administrators in deciding whether to resume, expand, or reduce in-person instruction. And it's important to note that the distinction there for a local health officer, it's about guidance, that this document helps them in their guidance of us as a K-12 system, but really the decision point around next steps is really ours as an organization. And so that's a key distinction to make, and I know I've been asked that over time, and that's important to know that we take guidance around this, we analyze all of the requirements, and at the end of the day, we have to ultimately make a decision for our next steps. And then kind of a summary statement that they make about the overall metrics and framework that they've developed. It says that taken together, the science and early experience of schools in Washington State and across the nation suggest that rigorous health and safety measures can limit transmission of COVID-19 in the school environment. Department of Health recommends comprehensive and strict health and safety measures to minimize the risk of transmission within schools, and through the governor's proclamation, it requires schools to implement them. And so through this, it's just highlighting the fact that it has been through a consistent and thorough process that has been gone through to truly evaluate these new metrics, these new decision points and guidance points for school districts. One of the pieces that you would find in the new toolkit is really kind of a set of questions. First and foremost here on the left, you'll see it says, can the school implement recommended COVID-19 health and safety measures? And I am happy to say that, truly as a district, we have done the work of developing our COVID-19 safety plan. We have implemented it at over 20 sites for in-person learning since early September. And truly, we are able to check the boxes in all of these questions because we have actually done this, we've implemented this, we've done this with fidelity, which then limited the transmission of the virus within our schools. And then the decision tree then says, okay, if that's in place, is the school and the health system ready to monitor for and respond to suspected confirmed cases? And if you went into our COVID-19 safety plan, you would find a very detailed outlay of what we do when a COVID-19 case is present on our campus, or that there's a suspected close contact with a COVID-19 case. And there are processes and procedures to evaluate that and make sure that we are responding appropriately, that if people do need to quarantine, that we do that, but that we have mitigating measures in place so that we don't have to shut down an entire school because there was a case, but that those mitigating measures are in place. We can do our contact tracing to understand who had close contact so that we can have a level of continuity to the greatest extent possible. I want to talk about the metrics that changed here in what was the decision tree. It's hard for me to transition to that term toolkit. And so I do want to talk about the different levels. So that high level is really when case rates at the county level are above 350. And as you saw, for us as a school district, being in King County, we are significantly below that. With 350, above 350 is the high range. We're at 277 right now. But even in that high range, given the research and data that the Department of Health has collected and analyzed, they truly do recommend the implementation of in-person learning for our elementary levels. And you can see here, there's some other conditions. It's groups of 15 or fewer, which is something that we will be applying and implementing, and that they really prioritize, which is kind of like a phase in pre-K through grade 3, and then 4-5. And so that is drastically different than the prior guidance that we had as a school district. Not only the case rates, but also the implementation of in-person learning services. I'm remiss if I don't point out also that it's about 350 cases per 100,000 over 14 days, but it's also about a test positivity rate of over 10%. also is another indicator for that high category. When looking at the moderate category, it really is when a county is at the case rate level of between 50 and 350, with positivity rates around or between 5 to 10%. And you can see here, again, it's talking about phasing in-person learning, prioritizing elementary, but you can see in that first paragraph, it does say that if not already, to then begin for elementary and middle school, which is, again, a significant change to what the guidance was previously. And then you can see in that last paragraph under education modality, it starts talking about high school, that when case rates are right around that 200 level, that's when we need to start thinking about the transition for high school students for in-person learning services as well. You can see the low categorization is below 50 cases per 100,000, with all students being provided in-person learning services, extracurricular activities following K-12 and applicable Safe Start protocols, and all of the recommendations around from WIA and whatnot as we implement our extracurriculars. So that's a review of the new guidance, which all of us received at the exact same time as the governor announced it. We didn't get a heads up or a preview around this, and so it took us some time to evaluate this, understand this, ask some questions to make sure that we were prepared and ready to digest this and then be able to make some determinations. And so that's the data and information and the guidance that we're using tonight as we think about some decisions. And so lots of questions around the state of the vaccine and Washington State's plan around phasing vaccines in. And to be honest with you, I didn't think I would have an update for you, but just today, the state released this phase-in plan. We currently are in that A1 and A2 phase, transitioning to B1. And what you'll see here in that February timeline, which they're calling phase B2, is really K-12, both teachers and school staff. And so that was, again, news to us that that our staff would be moved up this far in the process. I'm pleased for our staff that they will be able to have that availability. And so that's, to me, another part for our community as we think about moving forward, kind of that light at the end of the tunnel. For many, many people, the vaccine was a piece for them that really provided them kind of that hope as we think about next steps. So I'm going to see here if my looks as though my video is continuing not to work. So I'll just go ahead and continue to present in a blank format, and I apologize for that. And so Shannon, you can transition away from the presentation for a moment if you want. I do want to talk about a number of the lessons learned from this fall. Again, we had about 500 to 600 students that were learning in person on a daily basis. We also had childcare located at a number of our elementary schools across the district. We had literally hundreds of staff working directly with students on campuses and on sites, and we had hundreds of staff working not directly with students, but in the maintenance of our school operations, our administrators, secretarial staff, custodial, campus security, so many staff working on site to make sure that our campuses were continuing to operate and move forward. And again, our childcare did start last spring, and we were able to learn from that, again, implement that this year. But it's truly through the fidelity of implementation of our COVID-19 safety plan that we were able to mitigate the spread of the viruses on our campuses. Again, we had cases show up, but we were able to limit that spread because of our diligence and adherence to our COVID-19 safety plan. So with that, I can't stress enough as families and as staff that as we transition back for some students in-person learning, that all of us pay close adherence to our safety plans, our requirements, our mitigating strategies to make sure that we continue to mitigate the spread of the virus. We cannot send children to school sick or those that are showing symptoms. It is just better for them to stay home, to evaluate, are they really sick or was it a bad morning? And so we really need to pay attention to our children and their wellness. And if they aren't well, they do not then go to school. We also need to encourage our students, our children, to make sure that they also aren't disregarding any parts of the safety plan. That is truly how our collective commitment as a school district will be able to be actualized with students continuing to learn in person. I want to transition us to talking about learning models. This is, I know, of utmost importance to the decisions that families will make. It's critically important for our staff as they think about a potential transition to in-person learning. But I also want to comment that while this is a transition, it's about transitioning learning models, because there will be some students that are learning in person, but there will also be students that are learning in a remote environment. And again, I can't stress enough that both decisions are good decisions. I just want to make sure that that's recognized and that we understand that. And so talking about our in-person learning model, I just want to highlight a couple of pieces, and then I'm going to invite Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden to share with you much more details about this. But when we think about the in-person learning, we know that as students show up each and every day, they're going to have to go through attestation processes, which means that they are attesting that their temperature is in the appropriate range, that they don't have signs and symptoms of COVID-19. Those are processes that our staff go through anytime they enter the environment here at the Resource Center or any school across the district. We all are going through those processes, and our students will do the same. The requirements around masking and PPE, making sure that as a family, you know that your child truly will be wearing a mask while they are on our campuses, whether it's learning indoors or whether it's outside during recess or transitioning within the schoolhouse. Masking is a true requirement of our COVID-19 safety plan and truly part of the OSPI requirements for school districts. Our classrooms will be physically distanced, meaning our students will be 6 feet apart. So our classrooms won't look like they typically do. We won't have more than 15 students in a learning space at any given time. And we will be cohorting students, meaning that our students will learn together with one another, and we cohort them. So if there were to be a positive case show up on our campuses, that we actually could know who is in close contact, who would need to quarantine for a period of time. And that truly is the recommendation of public health and truly a best practice. You'll also notice, as Associate Superintendent Van Orden describes, lunch won't be part of our day-to-day operations, which means we will have an in-person learning block each day for K1 and in a hybrid model for our 2nd through 5th grade. But that lunch will truly be a grab and go or lunch to be taken home and eaten at home, with then time for a remote learning experience in the afternoon. Mr. Van Orden will describe in much greater detail what that looks like and some of the rationale for why. But I also want to point out that our positive case response is critically important to continuity. And so we take that very seriously. We ensure that staff and everyone understands what is the definition of close contact. And it really is, and the CDC just updated that about 6 weeks ago, and our state adopted that definition. And it truly is to be within 6 feet of an individual for a total of 15 minutes over a 24-hour period of time. And so that's the definition that we have to live with, and that is how we would implement our positive case response. I also want to touch on those families that are thinking about a remote learning experience. You can remember early in the year, we kind of thought about, do we create a remote school? And if students aren't in person, then we would place them in that remote learning academy. But really, as we've kind of thought about this implementation of a remote learning model, we truly have landed on that it makes absolute most sense for staff, students, and families to remain connected to their neighborhood schools to the absolute most we can, because that allows for students to maintain continuity. There are services that go beyond the classroom, such as special education services, our English language program, counseling services. We also know that our families also are greatly connected with our schools, our PTAs, and that those connections are truly what, part of what makes our district truly amazing is those connections and engagement with our families. We want to make sure that that continues. And so that remote learning experience for students that will participate in that truly will be connected to their neighborhood school. But we need to recognize that this is truly a shift for everyone, that it isn't just a student moving from remote to in-person, but it's truly a change for everyone. And so with that, I'm going to invite Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden to provide you with much greater detail around our learning models. And here he is. Welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Holmen. And thank you all for being here tonight. As Dr. Holmen alluded to at the beginning, we're in this confluence of historic events, any one of which are going to be written in the history books, and we have them all. A global pandemic that's touching the lives of every single person in the world, historic civil rights movement, and of course today's events in our nation's capital. Through all of this, I take great heart in knowing that the work that we're doing right now to transition to these new learning models have the potential to create stability in the lives of our kids, give us the ability to attend to their well-being in ways that we haven't been able to do as much of, even though our staff have been doing just amazing things, and you as families have been doing amazing things, but give us much more capacity to attend to the unique needs of our kids. As Dr. Holmen mentioned, our students and families and you are all experiencing this learning model that we have currently in very different ways. And for some, it's working beautifully, and for others, it's not working the way we want. And that's not for lack of trying or the quality of our teaching staff. It's that there's so many limitations to it. So as I mentioned, I take great heart in knowing that we'll be able now to continue to offer remote learning, as Dr. Holmen mentioned, but also be able to think about in-person learning where we can actually be creating those connections with our students. And so again, to me, this is just a wonderful opportunity to do something significant in our community with your help. Creating those conditions, though, as you know, requires transitions. And so as with any transition, we have to be thinking about many, many different factors. Transitions have the potential to be significant in terms of the success of the time that follows them. So for any major life event, if you can attend to the transition well, you could have potential success in the days and months and weeks that follow. I had the great privilege of working as an elementary, middle, and high school administrator and a high school teacher, and have two kids that went through school themselves and are in college now. I know from that experience that the transitions from home into elementary school and from elementary to middle and middle to high are some of the most significant transition in the lives of our students. And I also know from those experiences that there are things that you can do to make those transitions work more effectively so that kids can be successful following them. Part of that is by providing information to families and to students so that we're well prepared when we come into these settings to anticipate what to expect and to process it in advance so that when we come into them, they're not as jarring. If we don't do that, if we come into new conditions that are jarring and unexpected, it takes a significant cognitive demand, or puts a significant cognitive demand on us, and makes it much more difficult to attend to the things we want to do in school, the learning, the social connections, all the things that we do that are fun and wonderful in school. And if you think about all those things to expect, there are, particularly as kids come in as kindergartners, there's a whole new different way of learning, and suddenly you're in an environment with multiple people every day, and you're having to learn how to interact well with each other. You're making new friends, and that in and of itself is a major transition. You're having to adapt to a much more complex environment for every time you move. There are new expectations from different teachers, and all of those things contribute to students being successful. And at the same time, we have to make sure that we prepare kids and families very well to be equipped to move into those new environments. Now, in addition to moving into a school, we're having kids have to move from one form of school into a very different form of school. So our kindergartners who have maybe never even been in a classroom setting are now moving from a home learning environment into a school learning environment. And you know that's going to be a significant shift for them. So part of our goal tonight is to share information with you to start helping you and your child to start getting ready and anticipating what to expect. We'll share some information about some of the schedules we're working on and give you some information about what a school day might look like. Also know, though, as we start to gear up and get ready for the return to school, we'll be sharing much more information and much more specific detail. Particularly, you'll be getting much of that from your child's school. In addition, the last thing I want to say before sharing a little more information is we also know that transitions by their very nature take time, and we want to make sure we're not spending so much time on a transition that we never have students return to school, and at the same time do due diligence with the transition time that we do have to make sure we do it right. And so part of that transition time, as I mentioned, is sharing information with you, making sure that you have that, allowing families to select their model, and then there's a whole series of work that we'll need to do to make adjustments to our school staffing and to our students' schedules to make that work. But also our teachers need time to make another seismic shift in the way they're instructing. We've asked them to do this now multiple times. When we first had to close, to go from without any kind of preparation time really at all to a completely remote setting. And you may recall we actually took a little bit of time during that to prep people, and we found that that actually helped our teachers. Then we had summer, and then we had to make another shift from one kind of remote learning to a very different kind of remote learning. And again, we provided some transition time that helped our teachers. And so part of what we're doing right now as we gear up for our return to school is having our teachers think about and prepare for a return. Think about getting their classroom set up, getting their class lists set up, getting their lesson plans done. And those lesson plans are taking more time than ever before. My wife is a teacher right now and is teaching out of our upstairs bedroom. She's typically spending 1 to 2 days per week, so the entire weekend, just to get ready for her 1 or 2 periods at the secondary level. She's been a teacher for 30 years, is a master teacher, and she is spending significant amounts of time just to be ready to teach because it's so new. And so we want to make sure our teachers have the time. And so part of what we wanted to share with you tonight is part of the reason that we have the timing that we do have is to make sure that our teachers are prepared, to make sure you have information, and to get our whole system retooled to be ready to come in. So as you're probably hoping me to get to, we want to share now more of the details of what the days will look like. And so if we could go to the next slide, wanted to give you some context. I believe we've shared this in some prior presentations, but our school days, as I shared, are going to look different. And you know, some folks, as you think about, well, kids are returning to school, we know what school looks like, but as you know, school has to look different now as well. And these are pretty substantial changes. Our top priority is maintaining and assuring health and safety of our students. And so that includes like physical distancing and making sure that interactions are well maintained, thinking about interpersonal interactions with peers and teachers. And as you know, if you have young kids, kindergartners and first graders love to run and hug each other and get close to each other. And we have to be thinking about how do we manage all of those. And the way we do that is by teaching our students routines and procedures. What does it look like to go out on the playground and be safe? What does it look like to be safe in the classroom? How do you wash your hands the right way so that you're keeping yourself safe? How do you keep your mask on during class? How do you have a snack? We were having conversations about wanting to keep masks on, but kids need to take their masks off for snacks. So that requires instruction. The attestation that Dr. Holmen mentioned, as well as kids come into the building and health screening, need to be taught and practiced. The space in classrooms need to be very much considered. And then also outside of the classroom, how do we maintain physical spacing? And as I mentioned, also the masking. All of these things, again, are things that have to be done and we know work, and they have to be taught, and they have to be practiced, and they have to be reinforced. And so all of those things need to be planned and prepared for, and are factored into instructional design and instructional lessons. So that's health and safety. Our core purpose is to make sure kids are learning as well. And so if we go to the next slide, as we think about academics and what the academic day will look like, we're continuing to think about essential content. What are the most critical skills in our core academic areas? Because we are spending time on health and safety, that's having an impact on how much time we have in the day for academics. In addition, as Dr. Holmen mentioned, and I'll share with you in a moment, we're also thinking about the amount of time kids spend in schools. So for example, if kindergartners who would normally be in these very dynamic classrooms where they're moving from their desk to a carpet to a small group to recess, now have to be sitting in a chair for much of the day and have to be distanced much of the day, that's going to be something that we're going to have to factor in. And so we really want to take advantage of the time that we do have with in-person to really focus on academic instruction. And then the afternoon time that we'll be talking about, we'll still continue to have synchronous and asynchronous time. In addition, we're thinking about how do we continue to provide our specialist services, so our library, music, PE, our English learner services, our safety net as examples that will be most likely provided remotely, because we want to make sure that we don't have a music teacher who might see hundreds of students over the course of the week. That's something we're trying to avoid so that we can keep groups relatively contained. And so we're thinking about how do we plan for those and where do we slug in those services. As I mentioned, also, we need to be thinking about the instructional day. And finally, we're thinking all the way down to instructional materials. Things that might be shared normally in a classroom probably need to be more individualized, and purchasing books and resources and bins to put them in. So lots of work just to make this all work. Hopefully this is all starting to paint a picture of what needs to go into an instructional day and what an instructional day might look like. So the next slide is a high-level overview of our approach that we're thinking about right now for K1. And as Dr. Holmen mentioned, these are still in kind of the planning stage where we have a number of folks who are working and have been working earnestly since October. We have district office leaders and building leaders and teachers who, in addition to their normal jobs, have been doing a tremendous amount of planning to get us ready for a return to school and thinking through all the details and logistics. And so as we've been doing that, we've come to some different models. And so our first model is for K1. And I want to give you just a little bit of context on this. At the kindergarten and first grade level, we are thinking about a 4-day-a-week model. And right now, our kindergarten and first grade classes are roughly 20 students per class. And so let's say that you had 60 students in 3 classes, so 20 classes each. Well, with our new health and safety guidelines, we need to have our classes be no bigger or no larger than 15 students. So if you have 60 students with 3 classes, if you're going to run them at 15, you have to pull 5 students from each and add a new class. So now you're having to add another teacher to be able to keep class sizes low enough to run them safely. And so we are in the process of hiring additional teachers as we speak and shifting some of our existing staffing of folks who have been in more support roles but have teaching certificates to come into K1 so we can run K1 classes at 15 students. And so we'll be adding some additional classrooms and additional teachers so that we can have our K1 students in person 4 days a week. And that, as Dr. Holmen mentioned, will mean that we're having to move students around a bit. In addition to that, as I was mentioning, think about the instructional day. And think about a kindergartner, whether you have a kindergartner currently or even a senior in high school and are thinking back to the kindergarten age. Kindergartners don't sit well for long periods of time. And so what we're asking them to do right now, and even first graders, is to sit in a chair distanced from their peers and to probably have much more limited movement in a classroom. And so in a few minutes, we'll talk a little bit more about the day, but most likely we'll be looking at a day that's a little bit shorter than it currently is. And then on Wednesdays, we will continue to have a remote day. And there were a number of reasons for that. We looked at a number of other districts, not only in Washington State, but around the nation, and we're finding they were doing that and reached out and asked them kind of what was the thinking behind that. And also we're talking to our staff about it. That day is going to be so important for teachers to plan, prepare, reach out to kids that are having difficulties. And so we wanted to maintain that day so that we can continue to provide really high quality instruction. Because as I mentioned, we are doing things so radically different now that it's taking significantly more time for planning and preparation than it ever did. Retooling a lesson that didn't work as well, you can't draw on, as a teacher, your old bag of tricks because you're in a very different set of conditions. In addition, those Wednesdays give us time for our specialists and counselors to reach out to students and families. It gives us opportunities to do some things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And so again, we're looking at 4 days a week for K1. And then, as I mentioned, as Dr. Holmen mentioned as well, we will continue to offer a fully remote option for students. So that's our K1 model. And again, the reason we are able to offer 4 days a week is because we can add enough teachers to keep class sizes low enough. So as we go to the next slide, for grades 2-5, we hit a point at which we wouldn't be able to bring in enough grades K through 5 teachers to run all of our classes at 15. We are having to bring in about 50 teachers to run K1 at 15 students. And so for grades 2-5, what we're going to be doing is what's called a hybrid model. And we've shared this example with you earlier in this year and back in the spring. And the way this works is that you take a class, and so I mentioned 20 students before. As students get into upper grade levels, we look at classes that might be 22, 24 students. And what you essentially do is you take that class and you divide it into 2 groups, an A and a B group. And it's typically done by alphabet. It doesn't always line up perfectly, so you can't say we're going to use A through L as one group and M through Z as another. You have to actually kind of go through class by class. But essentially, you divide the class into 2 groups. And so a class of 24 would then have 2 groups of 12, which again allow you to have that space in a classroom that makes it more safe. And so there would be an A group that would be meeting with their teacher in person on Mondays and Thursdays, and then a B group that would be meeting with their teacher in person on Tuesdays and Fridays. And then on the days that they weren't with their classes, they would be in a remote setting and would have lessons and things to work through. And we'll talk a little bit more about the teacher contact as well, because as you know, if a teacher is working with a group of students in front of them, being able to attend to students who are also at home is going to create some challenges. And so we have some really wonderful ways of thinking about that our teams have been working on. And then in addition, in grades 2-5, we'll continue to have a fully remote option for students. That would be our C group, and that'll look in many ways very much the same as what students are experiencing now. There may be some minor shifts in the way we deliver services, but again, that should be pretty familiar for students. So that's the high level. You're probably wondering now, what will the day look like? What are some things that kids will be doing? So if we could go to the next slide. So this is a sample schedule, and I want to just again highlight that this is a sample, that the final schedules could potentially look different than this. For example, when students do reading and math might be swapped around just depending on the grade level and the school and the needs of the students. But the way it's going to work will be that in the mornings, there'll be in-person learning for K1. So remember, they're in school 4 days a week. Remember, we have to do that at a station as kids are coming in. And then they'll typically come into an entry task or what's called a social and emotional learning task, welcome, connecting to the day. Particularly in those first few weeks, it's going to be a lot about getting used to school routines and procedures, learning how to interact with their peers, learning about their teacher and about each other. And then it will start to shift more into preparing kids for academics, things like calendar and counting types of things. And then typically it'll go into an instructional block. It could be reading or math, where the teacher is teaching instructional lessons. And then there will continue to be recess. Again, socially distanced, but fortunately being outside, that helps with that. And there'll be routines and procedures that are taught for that. And we want to make sure that kids are fed so that they can have the energy and be attending to their lessons. And so there will be snack times, and we will have procedures for how to eat snacks safely, and we'll be sending you information about snacks that are going to be more conducive to an environment where kids are having to take their mask off and eat. And if you've ever been in an elementary classroom and watched snack time, it is something to behold. It's something that's orchestrated, and making sure that all the kids are getting their food and doing that well is going to take some work. And so we have some procedures that are working for that. And then again, an instructional lesson could be math or writing, some time to pack up. And then as Dr. Holmen mentioned earlier, there'll be an opportunity for kids to get a lunch and possibly as well a breakfast. And then we'll transition to back home. And again, some folks might be going, gosh, well, why not a full day? As I was sharing earlier, especially with our younger kids, but for all kids in elementary, the conditions are so vastly different in our current setting that being able to really attend well to academics for a focused period of time and then go home in the afternoon with much more flexibility, we think is really going to help our kids learn more effectively. So then in the afternoon when they get home, this is where we're really excited that it won't be completely blacked out. You won't have any connection with your teacher. Our teachers will have opportunities to connect with students in small groups. We're also building in some time for teachers to kind of be ready and prepared to do those things. And so there'll be some additional time potentially for our teachers to plan and prepare. And then there'll be some asynchronous time as well. And that could be our specialists, for example, library, music, and PE. Also be opportunities to do some science and social studies lessons. We have heard from folks, gosh, we really want to have a great science lesson. And we are having to make some tough decisions about what's going to be synchronous and asynchronous, but we're still working through some of that. And then at the end of the day, some kind of checkout. And again, at the beginning of this year, we had those, everybody has to be at the same place at the same time. And we found that some flexibility there helped out as well. But typically some kind of checkout, whether it's right at 3:05 or as a family, maybe you choose to do it later. So all of that afternoon time will be a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning. And then remember, Wednesdays will be very much the same as they are now, with opportunities for teachers and school staff to connect with families. So that's a K1 schedule. The start and end times will be on the same schedules they were traditionally. So if you were a school that started at 8:50, you'll start your day at 8:50. If you were a school that started, we have one school that starts at 9:05, and then we have some schools that start at 9:20 as well. So if you're a school that starts at 9:20, you would just adjust all of these times by 30 minutes. And again, just a reminder, this is a sample schedule. Schedules from school to school and grade to grade might look different in terms of where things are plugged into those different time slots. So that's K1, 4 days a week. If you go now to 2-5, so this, remember, is a hybrid schedule. And one of the things that we've been working through, and again, I just have to give credit to our teachers and our school administrators and our central office administrators who have been thinking through how do we make sure that there's human connection every day. One of the things you might think about as you saw that hybrid schedule is, wow, so really 3 days a week, my kid doesn't get to see a teacher. And so the schedule that we have that we're working through potentially could allow us to have adult contact every single day. So similarly, on the in-person days, we have to do attestation and entry tasks. So you'll see that that in-person day looks very similar to the K1. There's focused instructional time. We're very much focusing on the essential content, and then kids transition home. Then when they go home in the afternoon, the kids who are in person that day will be largely asynchronous. But here's the value of this schedule is the kids who were at home for the day will have an opportunity then potentially to connect with their teacher remotely, synchronously. So for example, if I'm in that B group and I'm home on Monday, in the afternoon, the teacher may be calling me into a small group lesson and connecting with me and getting me ready for the lesson that comes the next day, so that I don't have to spend maybe quite as much time the next day on reteaching the exact same lesson that I taught to the A group, because I prepped my kids in advance for it. And then I can do similar for the A group the following day. So we are looking at creating some ability for teachers to be connecting with some students synchronously. In addition, we're working with our specialists right now to see if there may be some potential to have some of our, like for example, library or music or PE to have a little bit more synchronous time too. So that could be another adult connection on those days when kids are entirely remote. So then again, if you look at the remote day, there could potentially be specialist time like a music class in the morning. Again, probably more on the asynchronous side, but some potential for some synchronous time, some live time, some of our dream box and math assignments, some writing journals while the teacher's teaching the class. And then in the afternoon, that B group or that group that was remote the day would potentially get a little bit more attention from their teacher. And again, same dismissal times. The value of that is that it allows us to run all of our schools on similar schedules, allows us to transport kids, and then again gives us that flexibility in the afternoon to meet with kids and give teachers some time to plan and prepare. So again, I have to say, as I've looked at different schedules from around our state and country, our teams have come up with something that I think really addresses that interest of not having kids go multiple days without actually having an adult contact. So really just kudos to them for all their hard work. So to wrap up, I think the last thing is you're probably going, okay, elementary, great. Secondary, I have kids in secondary. I want to know what that looks like. We have been, just as Dr. Holmen's mentioning, working on a phased-in approach, putting lots of energy into getting our elementary ready to go so that on that first day, we're prepared. We've been doing some work around secondary, and we're really now shifting our energies into planning and preparing for secondary. And so in the coming days and weeks, we'll have much more detail to share with you about secondary, whether that's a hybrid model or groups of students coming back. But as Dr. Holmen mentioned, we're committed to serving students in person, as well as having really wonderful remote options. And so not quite as much detail to share with you about our secondary, but I know that teams are working earnestly on that and have been working all fall. And so again, much more detail to come. So with that, again, high-level snapshot, expect lots more information to be coming from us, as well as your child's school and teacher. And again, thank you so much for, as Dr. Holmen mentioned, your partnership with us. We couldn't do this without you. So have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that detailed explanation for our learning models. Now I want to talk about timelines for shifting to these learning models. And I have two slides that essentially will communicate the same thing, one a little bit simpler and one with a little bit more detail around models. And so we are looking at truly shifting elementary during the month of February and targeting March for our secondary transitions. And so kindergarten and first grade transitioning on February 4th. And you're probably looking at a calendar right now saying, hey, that's a Thursday. Both or all three, the 4th, 18th, and 25th are all Thursdays, and that was intentional and purposeful. And so K1 transitioning on February 4th, second and third grades transitioning on February 18th, and then fourth and fifth grades transitioning on February 25th. And again, all of this comes with a significant amount of work and effort. Part of that effort is that selection of those timelines. And so just want to, this is a visual that you'll be able to pull off of our website if you're interested, but it provides you with kind of a high level view of start date and the type of learning model that's associated with your child's grade, knowing that, like what Mike just talked about, that our secondary efforts will truly be occurring over the next period of time so that we can get that squared away, communicated to you as staff and families as we then make some shifts. Also want to talk about a couple of additional items as we start to wrap up our evening. One of the key questions that I know that we've continued to get is, will my child be able to have the same teacher that he or she has right now? And I can't underscore enough the benefit of continuity for students and staff. We understand that as educators, and Just logically, it makes sense. But we also know that through all of these transitions, that we know there's going to be change for student-teacher relationships. And so we just want to be transparent with that. Simply put, I think there's a strong likelihood that children's teachers will change during this. And so I think it's important as a family to kind of understand how to help your child work through that transition, because while we will work towards that end for both our teachers and our students, we cannot guarantee that for a variety of reasons. One being the number of students in any in-person class has to be limited, and so we know that. Probably a great example of another reason is if you have a kindergarten teacher with 20 students currently, and if that teacher transitions to in-person, if all of his or her students select in-person, that means 5 of those students would need to transition to a new teacher. That's just the requirements that we have. That is the in-person model that we're required to implement, limiting the number of students in any given class. So that's a situation where a teacher and a student are transitioning to the same model, yet because of other conditions, we're not able to place that student and teacher together. So we just want to be transparent about that. Those are things as a family I know you're going to want to think about and process as you're thinking about this change that's upcoming, and that truly could be for students that continue in a remote model or for students that change to an in-person learning model. A couple of items that I do want to point out is that one of the things that we have prioritized in Lake Washington for years is the idea of planning and training for our staff. And so anytime there's a transition of students, we're also going to make sure that we provide the appropriate amount of time for staff to be able to do transition activities, training, planning, setting up classrooms, all of the things that will be required, whether it's a transition to an in-person or remote. And so as kindergarten and first grade families, you can anticipate that from Friday, January 22nd through Thursday, January 28th, that is really an asynchronous or different type of learning model for your children. There will be planned activities that will be well communicated, but just know that that week of time is going to be high intensity for staff as they work towards their transition and in that work. You may also be saying right now, well, isn't that right during conferences for kindergarten and first grade? So I do want to address some changes for elementary conferences as we are planning. I know our staff received communication from their association earlier this evening around this, and we want to be upfront with our families so that you can plan and prepare for this as well. But we're going to have a different timing for kindergarten, first grade, and then 2nd through 5th grade conferences this winter. And so kindergarten and first grade teachers will hold conferences with their current students on January 29, February 1, and February 2. And as you know, 2 days later is that transition to the new learning models and those changes. And so we just think it's critically important that our educators have that opportunity to engage with families around their students' learning and experiences, talk about that transition, communicate that information that only our educators can hold because they know our students so well. And so that will occur on those 3 days. And 2nd through 5th grade teachers will hold their conferences on the current timeline that's on our Lake Washington School District calendar, which is January 26, 28, and 29. And so again, more information will be coming out about this for scheduling purposes and whatnot, but wanted you to be aware of that as you're thinking about your work in all of this change and transition as well. Another item that I want to just reference quickly is we will be conducting surveys again to determine students that will be selecting in person or students that will be selecting remote learning. As you know, as for our K-1 families, you went through this activity earlier this year. You can expect to receive an email tomorrow indicating the preference that you selected, and that if you want to change that selection, the process for how to do that. But if you made a selection for remote learning, let's say, and that's the model that you want to continue to select for your child, you won't need to do anything because that selection has already been made. But if you do want to make a change, there will be an outline and a process for how to do that. 2nd through 5th grade families, you will receive directions tomorrow for how to make a selection for either in-person or remote learning. And all of the information we presented tonight will be uploaded onto our website. We will send that information out to all families tomorrow with a link to this presentation. So you have that to go back and hear Mike's comments about the model, review it on your own so that you then can make a selection. We are asking for a pretty quick turnaround for this information. So if you could make that selection by end of day on January 11th, that would help us in our planning and preparations. But we also survey our staff, and that will go out next week as early as Monday, could be potentially Tuesday, depending on a couple of things. But definitely want to make sure that both our families and our staff know to expect a survey to be coming out to seek information so that all of us can engage in these planning processes. And so as I close tonight, I can't highlight enough the appreciation we have for our community, your engagement over this time. I've communicated with literally thousands of you since early July. I hope our communication has been beneficial during this time. We work hard to put information together that's relevant and meaningful for you, to try and be transparent about the work that we're doing and some of the complexities that we deal with. You can continue to anticipate information flowing from the district. We'll continue our weekly updates for you. Know that our principals and teachers are implementing those things that are decided at different levels. Centrally, we want to make sure that there is some level of consistency across the school district. And so our principals and teachers are truly responding and implementing those things that have been decided through committee work and stakeholder engagement and whatnot. And so you may ask them questions, but they may not always have answers to all of those things. Please continue to submit your questions. We will send the link out that we gathered questions for this presentation. Please continue to submit questions through that so we can respond primarily through our frequently asked questions. We will do an updated FAQ based on the questions we received from tonight. And if you can continue to submit those questions, that would be great. Just want to mention and comment that I am humbled by the opportunity to serve this community during such a critical point in our time. We will continue to move forward as a collective community, doing this work together, respecting one another, knowing that there are complexities in each person's individual life. So with that, I will thank you for your time tonight. I hope this was beneficial for you, and thank you for taking the opportunity to hear about our pathway forward. Thank you and have a good night.